I'd like to call the Sherwood School Board to order for our regular meeting September 16th. Please stand and let's join in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, a number of items on the consent agenda. Anyone have any concerns that you want to pull off? Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt the consent agenda as presented. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Mike, let's hear you. I think we need to actually hear you.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. Next report, Superintendent Cordy.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and just welcome to our very first boardroom that we've ever had here in the Sherwood School District in our transformation project that was a transformation of an elementary to our district office. We're excited to have our very first board meeting here tonight. I want to start off by just really thinking about and calling attention to our staff and families and loved ones who have been impacted by the fires. We know that there are so many stories of connections throughout our community and certainly across our state. And it was really highlighted for me a couple of days ago when I had the opportunity over the course of the day to meet with several administrators. And there were 3 administrators in that day that had a close family member who had lost a home or a business or both. And I know from talking to others that it is far reaching across our staff and our community. And I just want to just take a moment just to really to note that and to let folks know that if there's anything that we can be doing to help as a school district, we would certainly want to know what that is. As it relates to the start of school, there are a couple there are many bright spots that I've had the privilege of hearing about and learning about over the course of the last few days. Of course, there are challenges and bumps along the way as well, and we're working hard to help work through those and provide support related to those, whether it's about staff in their new locations and moves to their new buildings and their new classrooms, or whether it's the use of Zoom with Chromebooks and some challenges that we're having there. But in just a moment, I want to share a few bright spots with you after I also share that there's this extreme kind of irony around with the pandemic. We as a school district got really good at figuring out how to do things outside. And things that we would never have imagined that we would have to do, and we figure out how to do them outside. And so we have gotten over the course of a half year kind of good at that. And then the smoke came and settled in and made everything that we knew about doing those things outside, all of that got turned on its ear as well. And then we had to rethink that. And through all of those challenges that have just been dealt one after another, our staff, classified, certified administrators have stepped up above and beyond to serve and meet the needs of our families and our students. And I just, I truly couldn't be more appreciative of what all that is. And last, but certainly not least, a couple of bright spots. Yesterday, I was at Ridges, and I had the opportunity to visit with a group of teachers who were physically distanced in their masks in the hallway, 3rd grade teachers, and they were so excited to tell me what the first couple of days had looked like. And one of the stories that they shared was the the mute and unmute lesson that ended up being about 40 minutes ended up being super successful, and everybody was ultimately able to do that. And I really appreciated their positivity and just the excitement that I was feeling from them. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Psalm shared, and I hope I don't steal your thunder, but it was just such a great text that you shared, Ms. Psalm, earlier today, that today was the first lesson in Sherwood School District's history in our dual immersion program. And so I mean, that's goosebump worthy right there. And what that means, and all that you did as a board and that our team did to create that opportunity in this district is certainly noteworthy and a huge bright spot. So with that, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. ASB Student Representative Ainsley.
Hi. So we have been thinking out of the box as leadership comes along. We are getting our welcome back video gotten together and like filmed and everything, of course socially distant. So we're all gonna film our separate parts and then they're gonna mesh them all together. We just broke into a committee today about what to do about the families and fires and that have had to deal with them. So we're thinking of partnering with an organization and then somehow like being with our rival Newburgh to kind of like show that we're there and do something with them, because we know that they were affected too, and that since they had so many issues that they don't start.
Ainsley, I think we lost you.
Next week. So we want to make sure that they don't just see us as a rival, and yeah, we're doing some pretty cool stuff right now.
We got about half of it.
No. Okay.
I think we did most of it. Thank you, Ainsley.
Good job.
Basically, what?
Did you get all the way to the end, or do you have more?
Well, depends on how much but that's totally fine.
I think we got the gist of what we're doing potentially with Newburgh. Was that the last piece you were talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're good.
Perfect.
Thank you. We don't have SCA or OSEA reports tonight, nor City Council, so I'll jump to Bond Oversight Committee, Taylor Giles.
All right, thank you, board, for allowing me to report. So we're coming in the home stretch here, and we were grateful that we were able to walk through the new high school and see it in its completed state. Obviously, you know, we sure wish there was as everybody on this meeting wishes there was kids running in the hall or walking respectfully through the halls. But we are hopeful that when it's safe for them to return, that it'll be something that will just really be a highlight for the city for years to come. It is still on time and on budget. We saw a great presentation on the curriculum needs and the schedules for which they're going to be purchased. And, you know, I, as a parent, was interested in kind of the overall game plan and things like that. We did think that just to a casual observer that it sometimes might appear that, you know, we're always changing curriculum and you know, this and that. So we were just kind of encouraging the district to make sure that they were being really clear when curriculum was being piloted or tested, and when it was being replaced, and things like that, and maybe even sharing the schedule so that it is so that we understand the intricacies and the difficulties and all of the other stuff, with virtual curriculum or book curriculum, printed curriculum. All of that was super interesting to us as a committee, but it was just really apparent that it's a difficult topic that not a lot of parents understood. So, but that is my report. Any questions from members of the board of things from the Oversight Committee?
Any questions for Taylor?
No, not a question, but a general comment. I was able to virtually attend one of your last meetings, and I just wanted to express my thanks and appreciation for all the work that you've done. Citizen committees are really invaluable to the district and to the board. The backgrounds that you have and the perspectives that you could provide really, help keep us focused and on track. So we're really grateful for all the work that you've done.
Well, thank you very much. I often felt like the dumbest guy in the room because I felt like I was the only person without a construction background. And so, but what was nice about that is that they could explain it to me in very simple terms and help me to really understand and make sure we were getting it. And by the way, kudos to all the professional staff as well. It is really I said this before. It's turned around my feelings about kind of local government. I was very impressed at how it's been handled and the professionalism of Skanska and the leadership team at Cornerstone and the district and their input. And so, it does feel, the only thing that I wish I could change is it feels like we crossed the finish line and we looked around and the crowd was not there. There was nobody waiting to welcome us across the finish line. So this whole thing that we've been sprinting for, I feel like, we gotta throw a party at some point here and when it's safe. So anyway, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. All right, that moves us to public comment. Ms. Ander, do we have anyone who's submitted public comment?
There is no public comment submitted.
Great, thank you. Next up is planning for transition to a hybrid model, and I'll first turn it to Superintendent Cordy.
All right, thank you. Well, Mr. Bennett, heads up to the front. Just a couple of things. So want to make sure that you see the DO Assessment Center, the phase 1 of some limited in person, the blueprint that we handed out there for you for your reading pleasure. And also just for this next conversation where we're talking about the transition to the hybrid model and the planning related to that, we just really, we've been focusing on K3 because that is imminent. And we just have some real preliminary thinking as it relates to grades 4 through 12. So please know that as we go into this conversation, we're much better equipped to and are planning to engage in that conversation around K3. So with that, Mr. Bennett, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Dr. Cordy. Good evening, Board of Directors. Nice to be here in our new boardroom. It feels quite large. I like it a lot. Nice to have 2 screens. I can look at that one and look at you at the same time and see what's up. It's very nice. Next slide, please, Ms. Christine. Just an overview of what we'll talk about tonight. Just we'll take a quick look at the metrics. We'll take a look at what we're talking about for a transition week and what that looks like. What some things we might cover on that, and then the timelines for each chunk of these grade levels. And we think chunking them out in these ways, in this manner makes sense, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is as we move forward. So we'll start by taking a look at just the metrics. These are changed slightly from what went out in the original board packet. I've looked at that graphic several times, and I think I finally interpreted it correctly. So these graphics are indeed accurate. Not these graphics, but these metrics are on. So we're open in grades K3. K3 is actually written as an exception to the general rule, but this is what the metrics are. So less than 30 per 100,000 test positivity rate, less than 5 and no confirmed COVID cases in 14 days. If we meet those for 3 weeks in a row, the first one for 3 weeks in a row, no confirmed, we can open K-3 to in-person instruction. That is slightly different than grades 4 through 12. Christine, if you could, next please, thank you. We have to get all the way down to 10 cases per 100,000. Stay at positivity rate of 5 in the county, and we have to be at less than 5% for the state open grades K through 12 or 4 through 12. Just to give you some sense of where we are in Washington County. In late July, we were at 54 cases per 100,000. By the 23rd of August, we were down to 35. By the 30th of August, 31. And the week of 9/6, which was last week, we were at 26.1 and a 4.5% positivity rate. So cases have come basically in half since late July in Washington County for 100,000 people. And the positivity rate has stayed below 5% the last several weeks. So that's a good sign. So we have met the metric for the first of the 3 weeks, which is really good news for grades K through 3. We do have some potential risk with fires going on, and that less people are getting tested, and will that raise the positivity rate? With fewer people getting tested, the more people get tested next week and bump up the total number of cases. You know, there's some things out there we just don't know. We'll watch it. Do we get a Labor Day spike? Things like that. But we have met the first week, and that is really, really good news. The other thing is the guidance and our MOU with the association says we should consider what is happening in Clackamas County. Not that it has to dictate anything, but we should consider. And their numbers are tracking better than ours and have been pretty consistently. So that's good news on the front for opening for K-3 instruction. Things will be going well. In terms of, next slide, please. Thank you. So I think this is probably the slide that really talks about what we're thinking that we need to spend a little bit of time with to make sure we're on the same page. So the way this is designed is, so for one, as we have a communication we're preparing to send out to parents this week and staff, letting them know, hey, by the way, we just met in week 1. Here's what the metrics say, and if things go well, here's when we might be back in school. So that we're starting to communicate with parents. We'll communicate every single week where we are with the metrics, just to keep people in the loop. And this really starts with the 3rd week we meet the metrics. We didn't put any dates on here because we didn't know what this would be. So this would be the 3rd week we would meet the metric. I've been having access to the data. I've seen it come out on Tuesdays. So we would learn on this Tuesday, we met the metric for this week. Our plan was we would continue in CDL for that week, have a transition week, and we'll talk about what's in that. But after taking a look at this, we believe we need a good 5 days in order to really prepare students and staff, mainly staff, and preparing to have students in. And then we would start in-person instruction the following day. So there would be, in essence, 13 days between the times we would open. Now, in the earliest possible scenario we have to open, this is actually a non-contract day. And so that would push opening out to Tuesday because we still need that 5th day. We don't have access to teachers on that day. So that's our thinking. Does anybody have any? I just like to hear people's thoughts, and this might be a good place to stop.
So just to be sure I'm understanding the way that that's laid out, we would have a 3rd week that we would know that we would know that we've met the metric. And after that third week, we would still be in comprehensive distance learning. We would take a week off in what would be in the next week and have no school, and then the week after that move to in-person.
Correct.
So it's a 4-week calendar, not 3.
That's a 4-week calendar. So this would be the week that we actually met the metric, and we wouldn't know until Saturday of this week that we'd met that metric. Well, the week runs Sunday to Saturday. So as of Saturday, that would be the week. The data comes out from Oregon Health Authority on one of these 2 days.
Usually Monday.
And so this is probably incorrect on that, but Monday we would learn that we met the metric here at confirmation. We would just continue in CDL that week, and this week would be off, and we would start here in in-person instruction.
And so the only thing that makes me uncomfortable about that plan is you could find yourself taking a week off of school to get ready, and in that week, the county fails to meet the metric, and we thus can't open after having taken the week off of school. That would be a risk with this.
I think it's a really significant risk, and we actually had some conversations about that this afternoon. And we've been doing some thinking, Mr. Walnuts and Ms. Psalm can weigh in on this as well, but I met with elementary principals this afternoon. And one thing we talked about doing was, perhaps, because in reality, even if we started this Monday, we could not meet this week and still have the same problem, right? Because it would be the following week. And the last thing we want to do is get a bunch of K3 kids excited to come to school, put them on the bus, have them come to school, have the report from OHA come out, and then put them on the bus to go home. That's a tough worst case scenario. And so as we planned around that a little bit and had some conversations, we talked about, well, what if we brought kids, a hybrid model means kids are in school at some times and work and learning from home the other. So what if at least one day in each of these 2 weeks, we brought some kids in to meet their teacher, do a read aloud, set up their school supplies, and actually start in a hybrid, bringing kids to campus in those weeks so that we've actually started. In other words, those 5 days of professional development wouldn't have to be consecutive in here. They may be spread out sometime over that period of time where we're getting kids into the building in some way, shape, or form. We don't have details on how that might look, but that's a concept we came up with today. Do you have anything to add to that based on our conversations today?
Just a couple of points. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. One of the things that in our conversation, and this was a conversation that we had about 2.5 hours ago, so let's bear that in mind, that we see it as a really positive opportunity for us to bring in portions or sections of our students, not the entire student body on one day, but allow them to come in, meet their teacher, much like we would do typically, if you recall the supply nights we would do with our students. With a smaller group, be able to talk about routines. How are we going to use the bathroom? What is this going to look like when we're moving from our classroom out to the recess in smaller groups, as a way for students to ease back into this building and school. And it's been 6-7 months since they've been in the building. And couple that with then PD and training for our teachers on the operational portions of the school and what that's going to look like, as well as giving them sufficient time to be rethinking what a classroom looks like when they have students, and we need to maintain the social distancing as much as is possible. Things like, we always meet on the carpet for our mini lessons in reading and writing. So what does that look like? How are we going to do that? How do we have to rearrange our room, get furniture moved out, those types of things. So, really focusing on PD on the operational side as well as the instructional side. But we think the benefit is really for our students ultimately to be able to have a smaller group, a little bit more quiet time with their teacher that they've just seen on a video screen.
I really like that, and I would add to that I think we also, not only none of the kindergartners actually been in school for school, but we've also had a number of kids that this seems like forever ago, and I can't believe this happened in 2020, but we did a boundary adjustment. And so for some kids, it'll be the first school, and none of them have been in Sherwood or what is now Hawksview. So that idea of bringing them in that small group and just figuring out what the school looks like, for some of them, that may ease a ton of anxiety relative to, let's just get everyone there on the first day for the first time, and should help guard against what you're talking about, Pat, too. But if it bounces in the fourth week and we tip over it, then that suggests that our level we aren't on a downward trajectory, we're just floating right at the line. So I feel better about us being in a kind of four-week transition or 3-week transition period anyway, just so that we're not, by the time they're fully back in school, we're not risking adults and caregivers, and that we're on a true downward trajectory instead of bouncing around right at the line.
Right, exactly. And what slipping back over the line can look like lots of different things. And so it's hard to prejudge that. But so Gary, what I think I hear in this idea is that we would learn on the first Monday labeled continue CDL. And so what you're saying is sometime that week we would get some amount of kids back in buildings enough to say we were in a hybrid model during that week, even if it was relatively limited, and mostly focused on the kinds of get kids acquainted kinds of things, and then the staff development that's necessary to make it work, so that by that fourth week, we would be more fully into our hybrid model. But we'd do something in that first week that we could, so that we had more control over our own destiny.
That's not what I just heard.
Slightly different than that.
Okay.
We would still need, it could be that the official start of in-person instruction in this model is here maybe, and that this is a partial student contact day and maybe some professional development, and this is maybe half days with kids and half days with professional development. And then this is a day where teachers work and do final preparations, and then kids start here. So it would be more along the lines, and then tell me if this is a conversation that we had, if you understand it the same way I did. We literally had this conversation starting at 3 o'clock this afternoon. But make sure we bring kids into the building each of those 2 weeks, but still find space to give enough time to train teachers in the transition. We haven't worked out the details of it yet, but the concept is still have enough time for the 5 days of PD, but bring kids in to learn these routines, orient them to the school, both this week and this week.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Okay. But I don't think we'd be more fully into the hybrid model this week. I think that was the one piece that I would.
Yeah.
I think we'd still be really in a transition week, and what would happen that week would still be on the orientation side more than the instruction side.
Right. And we'd be fully into the hybrid model in that fourth week, maybe not at the very beginning of that fourth week.
Correct.
So then the question is, what triggers they've started instruction, so therefore we're subject to the secondary set of triggers.
Yeah, which are based on what's going on in our own district.
Right. So I mean, Pat, you and I have a disagreement on this, and I think the thing I'm worried about is we were just talking before this meeting that these 2 weeks, last week and this week, given the fires and given everything else going on, the data is what the data is, but it is not a full representation of what's really happening in this community. We won't really know that until we get into next week. So if what we're looking at is we count last week and we count this week, and then next week happens, and if we're still fine, my concern about bringing teachers and kids and starting what then is, after school childcare and a whole bunch of other things that come with bringing even K through 3 back into these buildings, I feel pretty strongly we need to be on a downward trajectory, and we need to be able to hold it. If we get into that fourth week of continued CDL, even if we have partial student contact that week, if that number ticks back up over the trigger, I think we need to be thoughtful about, does that mean that we're really at a positivity rate low enough to make sure that we're not putting anybody in harm's way having them here?
Yeah, no,
Recognizing that we're already at a positivity rate that's 3 times what we feel comfortable with bringing grades 4 through 12 back into this building.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I guess I would like for that to be a decision that's under our control rather than under the control of metrics and driven by what's going on elsewhere. I'd like to be able to look and see, okay, the number went from 27 to 28 per day in a county of 600,000 people. And based on the zip codes, the cases were way off over there and not over here. And be able to look at that and make a decision about what do we think about that.
Well, 27 to 28 still doesn't cause us a problem here.
Sure it does.
27 to 28 is still under 30 and allows K through 3.
Oh, I'm sorry, 27 cases a day is 30 per 100,000.
Oh, okay. All right, I thought you were talking about 27 per.
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. We've got people that are coming from all over the county, so our employees don't just all live in Sherwood.
Right.
We don't have a bubble here where we're able to just keep people, and so if it's just within our district, then it's fine. We've got people coming from different places, and so the challenge, I just think that it is not, it is not useful to be putting people in a position where we're asking them to come and be in close contact with a student population that is less likely to follow social distancing, is less likely to keep their mask on, it's less, I mean, they're little kids. So the risk of screaming and yelling and sharing germs is just that much higher with that population. And we're saying we're going to do that at a rate of positivity that is higher. I think it's important for us to be on a true downward trend, not on just assuming because the cases are further in Beaverton than they are in Sherwood that we're all of a sudden okay, because we've still got staff and teachers coming from the Beaverton area.
So how about instead of you and I repeating ourselves for another round, we see if Sue or Eric or Mike have got thoughts on this?
I mean, okay, I mean, I guess I look at this and I see it a little bit differently because it really up until, especially with the way you're doing it, with transitioning and bringing small groups in, I look at this as really, it doesn't have to, we don't have to bring kids back, and we've got 4 weeks to decide. If something happens in the continuous CDL week and it starts going up, we're gonna know that, we can communicate that, or the transition week, or whatever. I mean, we've got 4 weeks there of flexibility. We're gonna have to be flexible. And if something looks awry, obviously we're gonna have to deal with that. But I like the way you're talking about the small groups and orienting kids for a lot of different reasons. But I think it doesn't make it a hard start date. I mean, if we're banking everything on that one first green day, I think that's problematic. But I think by kind of doing what you've talked about or what you're thinking about, it seems to be a win-win and give us flexibility. I mean, if we get to transition no week school that third week on there and things aren't looking good, then obviously we pull back and we have that flexibility to do that. It's not optimal, but it's not like we put everything on, oh my gosh, this is the one day. So I like that, we're not starting, if we were starting after that first week Friday, that would obviously be sketchy. But I think it gives us enough time for maybe some things to kind of fall out and the numbers to be a little bit more predictable or accurate.
I was thinking along those lines of predictable and accurate. The thing that makes me nervous, especially at the beginning of the year, is the fact that we had Labor Day, which I think was adds in a lot of ambiguity to this idea that we're kind of constantly we're heading in the right direction. And then the other thing is the smoke. I think that's gonna have an effect on me being confident that these numbers are actually heading in the right direction. If this was like, if you take it back a month and it was August and our numbers were looking like this and everything was we were kind of under this, it was kind of nothing radical was changing, that there weren't a lot of anomalies introduced into the system and everything. But just the fact that we had the smoke, we had the Labor Day, just doesn't give me as much confidence in these numbers that we have now. And I think just extending it, a week, giving it an extra week or two, just to kind of get past what's going on right now would make me feel much better, a lot more confident that we're heading in the right direction. And the second thing is about having the smaller groups, I think is a wonderful idea. I think it allows us to be a lot more agile in our approach. I think bringing all the kids in, I mean, we have to have everything pretty much dead on working that first time. Having smaller groups of kids come in, I think that right there will allow us to kind of do what you've been rocking out of the park for the last 6 months, and that's being flexible, adjusting to kind of, we saw this happen, we need to make this adjustment or that adjustment. So I really like that piece of it. Just the last two anomalies of Labor Day and the smoke is making me nervous about trusting the numbers that we have now.
So as far as my comments, so we're in week 1 and the numbers we have is 26.1. So we're the first week where we're under 30. And so if all goes well, the numbers are continuing to drop, then, we're in a position where this plan, we can start to implement this thing. But from what I remember from previous conversations, if, say we're in the continued CDL week or the transition, and all of a sudden the numbers jump back up to 31 or 32, my understanding is that there was a sort of a buffer built into these numbers. So that just because we do a spike that's just barely over, doesn't mean that we have to abandon all the plans immediately. Is that understanding correct, or did I hear something wrong there?
I believe it's only if we had to have started. If we don't start any kids in those weeks, then the metrics would be reset by going.
So if we have a week that spikes back to 31, then we restart everything. We got to do another 3 weeks.
Correct.
If we haven't done anything.
If we haven't done anything in the hybrid model.
Did I hear a yes there?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so we do have the fundamental risk of worst case scenario. We have a whole week of transition, no school, and then all of a sudden the numbers come in Monday, that first day back online when we're 31.
That's correct.
What happens in that case?
Well,
We tell everyone to go home? I don't understand. What do we do in that case?
we would have to stay in comprehensive distance learning in that situation. But I believe if we bring kids in small groups, we can avoid that if we decide that's what we want to do. I think that's an avoidable outcome. Whenever we decide to open, it could be, to whatever timeline we open on, as long as we bring some kids in small groups, we retain that control.
Okay, all right, thank you.
My understanding, people agree with that?
And just to be clear, I don't disagree that we should preserve some option. I am more conservative on this than I think, Pat is. I just that if we are close to that line, I think that we need to preserve the option to go back into CDL and then come back maybe the following week if the numbers prove up, and we need to embrace that. I believe that we ought to embrace that as a district because I think that the thing that sits with me is if we end up, God forbid, having a breakout in this district, I just
Yeah, I completely agree with you with respect to that. Rumor is I'm pretty conservative on this stuff too, as a general rule. I think it's the ability to preserve some local discretion.
and I'm not opposed to that at all. So I just want to be really clear. I'm not opposed to that. I just think that we need to be real careful.
Mhm.
So can I take a stab at what I think I'm hearing? So we have some staff, we're all on the same page. So if we meet the metric 3 weeks in a row, we would begin working now on a plan to bring groups of students back into school in small groups these 2 weeks, and start working on a plan for professional development. And at some point in time, we'd have to make, and then based on the caseload, or continuing the spread, based on the caseloads, we decide either to open theoretically in this week or to wait longer to watch the downward trend, and maybe continue in small groups if it's stable and maybe go back to CDL if it's going up. We would have to make those decisions based on data at the time.
Perfect.
And then the one wrinkle in there that we'll have to figure out a little bit, there's 2 wrinkles that we'll need to think about as I'm just thinking about this right here. I think that plan makes perfect sense. We need to think at some point in time, we would need to make a decision and have time for this transition to train teachers out. And so we'll have to think about how that works in this model, and maybe we start doing that a day a week now, once we meet for 3 weeks or something. I'd have to think about that. And so that's one wrinkle I think we'll have to think about. I don't know, John, if you have any thoughts on that now. And then I think the other thing that I'm thinking about is I'm not looking for an answer, I'm just telling you what it is. What do we communicate to families so that it's clear? One of our thoughts in this model was we could tell people that it is possible your kids will be in school if this occurs, your kids will be in school on the 14th. As an example, want to think about how we prepare families for this squishiness just around. I don't think it changes the plan. So just a couple thoughts I have to anybody has anything to add.
And I just want to confirm the transition week, however that's structured, that's a one-time transition. So that won't have to be, so if the case counts go back up, we return to CDL, the case counts come back down, we're not going to need to repeat this transition week again. We'll just be able to flip back over. Same story theoretically with 4 through 12. We'll need this kind of a space.
Seems reasonable that there might need to be a prep day or something like that ahead of it.
I was thinking the same thing. There might need to be a day to just sort of prepare and get ready to go. It's a lot for people working at home to come in and start school the very next day, having everybody on site one day preparing that.
But I think, Jessica, to your point, like that transition week, those 5 days, to your question, that would not be needed again.
But even in a world where we get notice that you meet the transition, we're not talking about, we wouldn't, again, for the sake of family and continuity and planning and all of that, even in a future world where the numbers go back up, we go back to CDL and then we're coming back, you'd get notice in that continued CDL week, and we would theoretically in the future continue the CDL so that you give families enough time to transition to back to in school and getting people on buses and lunch and all of that, right?
I would think so. I don't think if we ended up in a situation, and I hope we don't end up here where we're moving back and forth, I think we'd have to kind of continue CDL for the week to work out the transportation logistics and after school childcare logistics for camping and some of those things would invariably have to change. I don't think we could switch on a dime.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. I think that's really smart.
And I'm sure there's a dozen other things we could switch on a dime. I'm not thinking of, but there won't, whatever it is, we won't need to shut down school for an extended period of time. It would be a continuing CDL and then maybe a day transition and then back. Would you guys agree with that?
So in terms of communicating with families, seems like there's sort of two things we need to communicate that are a little bit contradictory with each other. One is, hey, families, for the first time, we're at a place where if things continue, we could have hybrid learning at a point in the future, and we know what that point could be. But we also know that things could change, and so here's what that point is. But also know that we could end up pulling back from that and saying no. So you families are going to need to be really, really, again, staff and everybody else, but families especially, are going to need to be super nimble and flexible and understand that for a whole host of reasons, we may be heading down that track and then need to stop at some point. Are those kind of the two main messages?
Yeah, I think so. That's sort of the nature of the message that's drafted now is kind of getting those two things across. Just highlighting that it has to be 3 weeks in a row and that if case rates change, we could start again. This tweak changed a little bit with this conversation. I think the other piece that needs to be added in is at some point in time after we meet for 3 straight weeks, we plan to start bringing kids in small groups to start learning how social distancing will work in schools and to learn what their new school looks like and to meet their teacher. And I think that is an add that needs to be added into that. And I think this was a great suggestion that came out of elementary principals today around making this really meaningful for kids and giving us this local discretion. I that was.
Well, and I think another piece of it is explaining so that families know to expect those transition 5 days. So we're not going to approach this communication this week talking about dates, but rather a model and a philosophy about it moving in and out, right? So when we talk about the transition 5 days, talking about so that they know to expect that, so that when we get to that point, it's not a, well, what in the heck is this about, right? So that's another piece that I think needs to be woven in to prepare people.
And then written the specific dates right now, so we'll need to sort of soften that up.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. And then another piece would be sort of updated status. So
Yeah.
next week, sorry, the numbers went back up, and so we haven't been the 3 weeks, or now we're in the 2nd week, and so, you know, whatever, wherever we are at the time, so
Yeah.
people continue to think about preparing.
And one of the things that we've been talking about as a team is, as we approach to this week, anticipating this, is a commitment every week towards middle or end of that week, after we know the metrics, communicating to families, communicating to staff every week, and just really being really thoughtful about that. Because one of the things that I was sharing with a couple of folks is that, you know, this feels like the first time in about a half a year where we actually can sort of look ahead, which, you know, and back in the olden days, this wouldn't have been very much time to make all of these types of changes. And now it's a beautiful kind of a luxury and an opportunity. It's a whole lot of work to do in a short period of time, but at least we have some runway to communicate and try to be as proactive as possible. So I think it's an opportunity to communicate that we will definitely seize for sure.
Yeah,
Just to look at this by temptation. I mean, it's been a long time since I've had little guys, but you know, we've kind of talked about potentially bringing in small groups in that continuous CDL week. I would say don't do it, only because make that week be another consistent week of we're doing continuous CDL, gives us an extra week, and then maybe in that transition no school week, I mean, make that 7 days instead of 5, whatever that looks like, but that can be your week of let's do the small groups, so that parents have that consistency and can do a little bit more planning. And you're not bringing them in quite as soon. You know, I think giving a little more space and not touching that continuous CDL week and just having it be, okay, here's another consistent week, just probably makes a little bit more sense from a parent perspective with young kids. I think that would have been really hard to sort of, hey, on this week, we're going to go in for, you know, a couple hours, and then next week, maybe another couple, and then you might go back to school, you might not, if we maybe limited it. I think that would be easier for parents and probably for staff. I mean, just to be able to say, okay, this week I'm doing this, and now I'm going to change hats, and we're going to do something different.
certainly solve the logistical challenge that we came up with was, you know, we would have to have trained teachers a fair bit by that last Friday of CDL and have them come in and train their kids in health and safety protocols.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that solves some challenge that we hadn't yet worked out.
It may be useful to just, we all understand it because we've been in this for like, feels like forever, but the putting together some sort of calendar that can be constantly updated, so as people get the weekly update, they can go and see what, you know, if we stay on track, this might be the day, so they can start thinking ahead about, I shouldn't take my kids to go see their grandmother in San Diego and plan on having them do school from San Diego that week because we might be back. So just trying to get families starting to think about adjusting their schedule. So whether it happens or not, they're physically in town for the week that they come back and do the walk around, so their kid doesn't miss that. And so that they can start putting it in their head of what these dates might look like, even if they shift. Lots of asterisks all over the page, but at least giving it a sense.
I mean, however this ends up kind of filtering out, I'm just really excited that we're moving ahead. You know, to hear that some districts aren't doing that, I think, you know, ultimately we all want these little guys back. We get it that it's critical. So I really appreciate all the work and thoughtfulness that's come around to get us here.
I was just about how much people would like to see. Young and back.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, sorry. Go finish your thought. I wasn't sure if you were finished or not.
You're good.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate the comment that Sue made about not bringing in small groups too soon in that the continued CDL week. And then also that the weekly communication, I think is that the point Heather made is absolutely critical. I mean, all the K through 3s should know that we are in week 1. They should get a communication this week concerning that, if possible. And just my worry, we're at 26 now for week 1. My hope would be by the time we're at week 3, we're at 20 or below. If week 2 and week 3 is like 27, 26 again, if we're plateauing for these 3 weeks instead of seeing a continued downward trend, that's where the risk really occurs that some sort of spike might happen. If week 3 is at 29 and we got 3 weeks under 30 and boy, we're just gonna have to think about this real carefully. That's going to be a very scary scenario. If week 3 is at 29, that's bad news.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, I think that part of the challenge is that the reproduction number or the R0 isn't gonna fall to 0.5, which would get you down to a 20 or a 15. We're holding pretty steady at 0.9. And if we can hold there, then it'll go down, but it'll go down slowly, which is what we want it to do. If we start seeing it spike above 1, 1.25, 1.5, then we got to be concerned. But I'm pretty comfortable if we can continue to have the number of people who get sick only get 0.9 people or 0.8 people sick, other people sick. That is everything going in the right direction. Even if the numbers don't drop dramatically, that's okay as long as the numbers are heading in the right direction.
Yeah, could I take a minute and talk a little bit about some of this data and where it comes from and its challenges?
Yeah.
So the reproductive rate that Jessica just talked about, as she said, is once someone gets sick with coronavirus, how many other people do they get sick? And you want it to be that they get less than one person sick, so 0.9 is what she mentioned, which is where we think we are. There is no meter to go hold out in the air to figure out what is that reproductive rate. You have to infer it from things. The easiest thing to infer it from is deaths, because there's no sort of judgment call, someone's dead or they're not dead. But that's the last thing that happens. And so you also can infer it from hospitalization, because if people are sick enough to go to the hospital, they typically go to the hospital. But that's the next to last thing that happens. So you really end up looking at the number of cases you have. We think we find about 1 out of every 4 cases, maybe 1 out of every 5. Some studies suggest it's only 1 out of every 10. I don't think that's our experience here. So that's where we look at these metrics of how many cases per 100,000 and what percentage of tests come out positive. Really high percentage of tests coming out positive is a bad sign, because it means there's lots of disease and you haven't found it. Below 3% of tests being positive is kind of the gold standard. That's where you'd like to be. We've been trending down until this last week from about 6 down to around in the mid-4s. Last week and this week are highly problematic for all of these data sets. The 3-day weekend always screws up testing because although the state lab typically doesn't take time off, commercial labs do take the weekends off. People don't get tested. One big source of tests is when people go into the hospital or some other provider for a procedure, they get tested ahead of time. That's lots of people who test negative typically. And all that stuff slows down on the 3-day weekend, so the numbers look a little funky. Then in our 3-day weekend week, we have the fires. And aside from the fires themselves causing people to go to shelters, which could spread the disease, it also caused, because of air quality problems, lots of providers to cancel procedures. So all those tests came out of the system. And so you've got, could there be a spike in disease from the 3-day weekend? Because we've had that in other 3-day weekends. Could there be a spike because of shelters? On the other hand, going the other direction, could we be overstating how much disease there is because we flew a bunch of negative tests out of the system because we didn't have all those procedures? And there's no way for us to sort out what's actually going on with those different pieces moving independent of each other in ways that we really can't actually see. So last week's numbers were okay, but the tests were down a fair amount. This week's numbers, we had 750 tests that we processed on Monday when we usually do 3,000. So this couple of week window, maybe into next week, we're going to make all these numbers that we're talking about really, really tricky, which just complicates this whole thing. Hopefully that wasn't too much boring detail that I live every day.
Which, that's my nervousness and uncertainty. I think the good news in Washington County is that the hospitals here, none of them really pulled back on elective surgeries, but because we're such a close metro community, people that would go to, say, our Oregon City Hospital, we weren't doing a ton of elective surgeries this week because of,
Radiant Park.
yeah, because they were full with people from fire places. So, yeah. Or empty because they were in an evacuation zone.
Right.
It's
So-
really easy. This is just super simple stuff.
So Gary, you got enough from us?
Oh, yeah.
Stop, he just wants to sit down. This is
No, I'm
really,
good.
this is really, really hard, and you guys have done such a great job, and just thank you. Thank you for all of the really tremendous thought and care and wanting to bring kids back as soon as possible and safely, and staff and all of that. Just thank you.
One more thing I'd like to say, based on what Pat said, if we find that this 3-day weekend and the fires have really thrown the numbers off and we just can't trust what the numbers this first week is, maybe we'll know that when we'll know this in the next few weeks, we could shift this whole schedule down a week, throw this first week out and make this coming week, week 1. We don't have to make that decision now, but if we find that we really have no trust at all with the fire and the 3-day weekend, then maybe that's something we could consider. Just something to think about. That's all.
The good news is, Mike, I feel pretty confident that the people on either side of me are pretty expert in the state of Oregon. So I think we're in good shape to be flexible, but I agree.
So based on all of
I
that,
agree as well.
we will continue to watch the metrics. We won't bring any kids back to school in the continued CDL week. Things are looking good. We'll start bringing small groups back this week and see where the data are and make decisions at that time.
I think of October 12th.
That's correct.
Today.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to start telling parents it might be that week so that they're, again, physically here, as sometimes elementary parents are like, well, I can.
You do this from anywhere.
Yeah.
I think the message is we could start potentially having groups of students come in the week of October 5th, and we could potentially start in-person instruction sometime the week of the 12th. Potentially, and that would be the earliest start date on either account. Yeah, we'll watch the test data.
I just think people are going to be so excited to bring their kids in those small groups, especially with the boundary change and the new buildings. I mean, I just think they're going to be excited and probably lined up to drop off early. I would have been.
We might need help with traffic.
I mean, it's going to look a lot different because we have an in-service day in there and a professional development day already in that week. And if it were that week, that's a PD day, that's a non-contract day, and so there's going to be some sort of walking anyway. I think we have a large order.
Thank you.
Great.
Great conversation.
Okay. So we'll just go through these next couple, I think, pretty quickly. I think we just want to give you some sense of some of the things that we'll have to take on with staff in this transition week. Just all of the procedures and things that they're going to have to learn. My guess is, although we've been pouring over the pretty extensive guidance around this stuff, I guess the teachers have not been. They've been thinking about how to teach kids in CDL. And the details are important to this. We've written the blueprints, but executing those blueprints is a little bit different level of detail. The next one is sort of similar. Mr. Walnut covered some of this stuff. already, but classroom setup and planning will look different. Without kids on the carpet square, we allow the number corner, how are teachers going to approach that? There's going to be things they're going to have to change. No more small groups at the kitchen table for reading instruction. What's that going to look like in classroom? The teachers are going to need time to think that through. And even just building culture. Kids have been isolated for months. There's going to be some trauma with that. There's going to be kids who struggle with anxiety and behavior. That's probably going to be different than it was had they went through a normal school year. We see at the beginning of a normal school year where we don't know what it's going to look like. There's just time to take things like that and figure it out. We just wanted to give some sense of why it takes a week to do that, because it's a lot of really complex work. Even just how kids are going to get school supplies off the shelf is a new thing, right? I mean, how they're going to get their Chromebooks, their laptops, things of that nature. All that changes. So, Dr. Cordia referred to this transition timeline for 4 through 8 and 9 through 12. And this is really preliminary. I wouldn't even call this draft thinking. This is initial thinking, just sort of out of the gate. We're a ways away from this. We've got some case rates about percentage-wise substantially before we get here. But we're thinking that grades 4 through 8 are probably a similar chunk, in that if we hit the metrics for grades 4 through 12, that we probably can transition fairly quickly in grades 4 through 8 in terms of bringing those students back. Meaning we don't have to worry about credits in a high school schedule and things of that nature that complicate the high school level. And so we think that we would have 5 days of transition and bring them back after a week for winter break. We probably just finish in CDL and take the whole 2 weeks and come back. So we would see what that looks like. That's our thinking on grades 4 through 8. 9 through 12, as we've talked about it, and we had some more conversations today about this. Just the nature of high school courses, we think it makes sense to transition at the quarter end more than likely. Given especially the way that the high school schedule is built, stopping for 5 days in the middle of the semester is a little bit problem. Middle of the quarter is problematic just in terms of percentage of time we lose. I mean, you could change the dates and move some stuff around. We just thought that would be very disruptive given the high stakes nature of high school and their schedule. And in that 5 days of transition, as we talked about it, we thought taking 2 days from the quarter that you're currently in when you switch, 2 days from the next quarter as a professional development and a work day in between for the 5 day transition, just to keep that balance, because that's one thing teachers are really struggling with is just fewer number of instructional days. So
the only thing to think about here, this is probably wishful thinking, but assuming nothing went wrong with Labor Day or fires or anything else, the trend line that we were on would have put us at the 4 through 12 metric really close to that end of the first quarter date, but maybe plus or minus a week or two. And so you might want to think through what happens if like we're in the 3 week period and the end of the quarter is week 2 or week 1 or something like that. Whether you really want to go an entire additional quarter.
I think that's a good thought. And yeah, it depends on where that lands, right? And I think it looks a lot different if you're 1 or 2 weeks into the quarter than if you're 6.
Yep.
And so, and again, I imagine that this will be a scenario that as we get closer to that, we'll bring some more concrete thinking to you and have a similar perspective of what we just had at some point in time in the future as we have some time to think about it as we get closer to that number. And right now, we'll put our energy into K3 at the district level and getting that up and running.
Do these transition days count as curriculum days for us as far as the state's concerned?
They will count for instructional minutes for us this year, in that normally we have 30 hours a year we can count professional development towards instructional minutes or instructional hours. And this year they raised it to 90, so they added 60 hours, just acknowledging that it's going to take more time.
I mean, my tummy tells me that I think at least my nervousness, my biggest nervousness is around us bringing in K through 3. And I feel like we're going to learn a ton when that happens about that transition and whether it works and what happens with case rate and all of that. If we're successful there, this conversation may be a lot easier when you come back to talk to us about 4 through 12.
I think so. I think we're going to learn a lot elementary principals, I think you're gonna be leading the way on this one.
God bless you for doing that.
So the other question I have, and I don't want to need to have this discussion now, but at what point would we have the discussion about what our bounce back matrix would look like? Would that be,
Sorry, built in.
right? I thought we got to decide what, or we had some more say over what that would look like.
No, the general, like, you have to, well, we could decide to shut down sooner than state metrics, but the state metrics, I don't think have been finalized yet, but they'll have to do with cases in your district. Probably, and tentatively would be enough, it would be school-based rather than district-based, it would probably be enough cases to take down 2 or more cohorts, something like that. Is kind of the direction that's heading, but it hasn't, I don't think it's been finalized yet, but that would be a state standard.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, next up is a resolution that is in your packets, titled resolution of the Board of Directors of Sherwood School District 88 condemning racism and committing to being an anti-racist school district. This is a resolution that's been developed largely by the Oregon School Boards Association with a little bit of editing by staff to particularize it to Sherwood, but not really changing the substance of the resolution. It makes reference to our equity work and those kinds of things. This would be a first read on the agenda tonight, and a second read and adoption on a later agenda. Hopefully you'll have a chance to at least glance at it. And I guess my observation would be the language is appropriately strong in condemning racism and committing ourselves to not being in favor of racism, but actively being anti-racist, helping deconstruct those systems and structures and activities. And I think if you've been around enough kids in the district of color over the summer and heard some of what they're talking about, they've shared some pretty disturbing stories about the day in and day out, just plain old racism that they're exposed to in school. And so any questions or discussion about this, we'll have it again on our agenda next meeting.
Just a quick comment. I mean, I just think this is a really important thing for us to be doing right now. I'm really happy to be seeing this, and I think the wording is very, very well done. What I've seen so far. So thanks for bringing this up.
Okay. So I'll move on to action items. The first action item is the first read for the anti-racism resolution. It's in the record. And we'll consider it first read and move it to second reading. Next is policy updates, Mr. Allen.
Okay, good evening, Board Chair Allen, Board of Directors, and Pretty. OSBA submits drafts of policy updates to the district periodically throughout the year. These updates represent changes in law that impact board policy. District administration make recommendations to add or revise policy updates in sections G and J, and are in your board packet tonight for first read. We'll plan to bring those back for a second read in October.
Yep, let's go ahead and move on to the next policy.
Okay, and then on August 12th, we brought updates to board policy PBDA for first read and review. The updates were necessitated by changes to the identified locations in each of your buildings based on the building of the high school and the transformation schools for that policy. And so tonight we bring back the updates to policy GBDA for second read and hopefully adoption.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I move that we adopt policy GBDA as presented.
A second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bennett, high school language arts.
Thank you, Chair Allen. I mentioned this briefly in my curriculum update in the work session that we are just finalizing our state kind of document here. We have 4 more novels that we're bringing to you tonight for first read for accelerated English 10, and we'll bring those back to you at a meeting 4 weeks from now for second read and put it out.
Very good. All right. That concludes our agenda. I just wanted to make a quick comment. Everybody's been working really hard all year. Now it seems, if you think back, and one of the things I really specifically wanted to make a point of doing tonight is to thank our parents and their kids. They've been working as hard as anybody throughout this period of time. They have given us a lot of grace for things that haven't worked as well as we would like, or in some cases just haven't necessarily worked at all. Especially if they've got really little kids, their lives are kind of turned upside down, not just by the pandemic and whatever effects it's having directly, but the effects that distance learning for little kids have on them at home. And we've asked them to just do monumental things, in support of their kids. And I want to thank the kids too, who are having, no matter how hard we try, a less than optimal experience. We are trying, everyone is trying really, really hard to make this work as well as we can, but this is not the system anyone would probably, any of us would set out to go design on purpose. And so I just wanted to thank parents and kids and families, extended families, for everything that they're doing and going through, their flexibility and the grace of experience. Anything else for the general good? In that case, our next meeting is October 14th. All those in favor of adjourning leave, those opposed stay. We're adjourned.